When the word oligarch is mentioned, a common figure that comes to mind is former Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich, of whom Western media has dubbed Putin's favorite son. When his name is in the news, it's rarely in good spirits, like that time when his former business partner and mentor issued a $5 billion lawsuit against him, or when the EU sanctioned him in March 2022 for being a sponsor in the Russia-Ukraine war. Though appealing and denying close association with President Vladimir Putin, he would attempt to prove that by being part of peace talks between the two countries, only for him to be poisoned during one of the meetings. BBC News released a short story displaying $40 million links between him and the president months after. Described to be secretive, reserved, calculating and efficient. How did this shy, orphaned and impoverished individual rake up a $14 billion net worth through Gulf War entrepreneurship and a web of political connections? We'll be doing the reading and investigations. You'll do the watching. Welcome back to Gaging Productry, where we provide you abridgment films. Thank you for joining us today. As always, we need to know the background of who we're talking about. Roman Abramovich was born October 24th, 1966, in Saratov, Russia. His father Aaron was employed as a factory and construction worker, whilst his mother Irina was a music teacher. He would sadly lose both his parents before the age of 4. His father passed in a construction accident, and his mother from blood poisoning. Relatives took in young Abramovich and raised him in the Komi Republic in northern Russia. He made do with very little growing up. However, despite the financial constraints, he had commendable discipline and determination, selling toys to his schoolmates. Relatives noticed this and encouraged him in his entrepreneurial pursuits. This seemed to boost Roman's confidence significantly, as upon completing high school, he would join the army, delving into the business he seemed destined for. He would allegedly siphon small amounts of fuel from military vehicles and sold it back to the military at knockdown price. Though realizing the risk that came with being in this business, he would put it on hold and proceeded to attend the Gopkin Institute of Oil and Gas, which would prove helpful years from this point. The 90s approached, and the country was headed toward a drastic change. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The Soviet Union had just collapsed and was replaced by the newly formed Russian Federation, led by President Yeltsin. Mr. Yeltsin would lead the country towards chaos in just 5 years. Communism was scrapped, large state companies would be abandoned and variously restructured or looted by their own executives. See, Abramovich watched this transpire and began positioning himself. The government was handing out privatization vouchers, similar to the one on your screen, to its citizens as a means of sharing the nation's wealth by granting them a potential stake in an SOE dating back to 1992. Fortunately, Abramovich had been playing the game well through the late 80s, trading commodities for a Swiss firm called Runicom, specializing in mainly, you guessed it, the trade of oil and petroleum products. He applied shrewd investments and began moving in the correct circles as his name began to hold weight in the business world. He and his wife Olga were said to have set up a diverse portfolio of companies, mainly consisting of doll and toy manufacturing, pig farms, timber, sugar, and foodstuff. Roman had divorced his first wife Olga in 1990 and married former Aeroflot stewardess Irina in 1991. Remember when I mentioned the risk of being in the oil business during Abramovich's stint in the military? Well, he got a little ambitious over the years. An arrest warrant would be issued for him around this period, on the basis of theft of government property, where a train loaded with diesel was robbed. In an investigation document, it alleged that Abramovich personally met the shipment, had the train rerouted to Riga, Latvia, where the fuel would subsequently be sold. Abramovich would be sent to prison. However, after doing some time, the case would mysteriously disappear, so he was released thereafter. He since stated that this was just all a misunderstanding. Though, seeing the cost of his mistakes, he realized that if he wanted to cash out big time in this business, he required some assistance. Abramovich began moving amongst politically affiliated businessmen. One of those men was Boris Berezovsky, a former mathematician and researcher turned businessman who accumulated wealth in the late 80s from opportunities presented by Perestroika, a system of restructuring political and economic systems of the Soviet Union in an attempt to end the era of stagnation. Yes, I spoke about this in the Khodorkovsky-Yukos oil collapse film. The reason I'm telling you about this is because it plays a critical role in Abramovich's accumulation of wealth and the $5 billion lawsuit brought against him by Berezovsky 20 years on from this point. So Berezovsky took advantage of the Perestroika program and founded Logovars with Badri, a Georgian businessman who is heavily involved in Berezovsky's business and political circle. Together with former senior managers from Russian automobile manufacturer Avtovaz, began conducting a major business partnership. Logovars developed a software for Avtovaz, as well as servicing foreign cars and selling Soviet-manufactured vehicles. Avtovaz mainly profited from hyperinflation by taking cars on consignment and paying the producer at a later date, when the money lost much of its value. Berezovsky had formed the All-Russia Automobile Alliance around this period, which he had 30% control over. The company raised a $50 million fund to build a plant that was supposed to build the people's car. However, the funds raised weren't sufficient, so they were instead invested in Avtovaz production, which in turn would make Berezovsky a wealthy man. Abramovich began associating heavily with Berezovsky, whom later became a friend and mentor. One thing they mainly had in common was their interest in growing their businesses, political influence, and wealth. What better way is there in doing that than getting your hands on a state-owned entity? Berezovsky being a prominent figure, featuring in interviews on various television networks, he would receive an invitation to President Yeltsin's tennis club through his advisor, confidant, and bodyguard, Alexander Kozakov. Berezovsky came to the tennis club on a regular basis and promoted his business interests to the president. That's where he truly got a seat at the table. Russia was in borderline economic and political instability. Russian businessmen loaned the government money against collateral consisting of blocks of stock that amounted to controlling interests in state-owned entities. The government defaulted on the loans, so the firms would thus pass into the businessmen's hands. According to Wikipedia, beginning in 1995, Boris Yeltsin's government began privatizing state-owned shares in companies through a loans for share scheme. The scheme helped with fundraising for Yeltsin's 1996 re-election campaign and restructuring freshly sold companies at the same time. This was done to outweigh communist sympathizers, as one source speculated. Abramovich being an oil trader, he set his attention on Sibneft, Russia's third largest oil company at the time. However, like I mentioned, he needed some help. President Yeltsin was headed towards re-election where the odds of winning were against him, so a deal was allegedly structured between the people handling the Yeltsin campaign and businessmen like Berezovsky, whom would agree to fund the campaign and spread pro-Yeltsin propaganda through various media outlets like ORT Television, a channel Berezovsky gained control over in 1994, and NTV channel, owned by Russian media tycoon Vladimir Gazinsky. Berezovsky and Abramovich would allegedly receive $137 million of siphoned government money as a loan to fund the Sibneft acquisition. Abramovich would only allegedly pitch in $18 million. Whether he got that from his own pockets or was part funded by Berezovsky, that we'll never know. The $18 million would be placed as part of the $137 million to acquire a 75% stake of Sibneft, which was valued at $2.7 billion, whilst other sources allege it was worth as much as $13 billion. In summary, Abramovich allegedly paid $18 million for a 75% stake in a company worth between $2.7 billion and $13 billion. Sources like Wikipedia claim each partner paid $100 million for half of the company, while some sources like the BBC Panorama documentary, titled Roman Abramovich's Dirty Money, allege the entire company was bought for around $250 million. Based on the information we have, Boris Berezovsky would receive a portion of Sibneft's profits informally. President Yeltsin won the election and was re-elected. Abramovich became an overnight billionaire. Everybody wins. Two years after the Sibneft acquisition, Abramovich's next target would be the lucrative aluminium industry. Since privatization in 1995, aluminium wars were prevalent at this point. Smelting plant managers were executed, metal traders were executed, and journalists, you guessed it, were executed. Organized crime groups, politicians, and businessmen battled for control of the industry. Abramovich would initially be hesitant to enter the aluminium business, stating that every 3 days someone was murdered. He would once again use an established businessman that was already affiliated with the right people, like billionaire Oleg Deripaska, another oligarch that enriched himself off of privatization. He is often characterized as a victor in the aluminium wars. He founded both Basic Element and Sibersky Aluminium in 1997. Basic Element is one of the largest diversified industrial groups in Russia. Sibersky Aluminium, on the other hand, was a company formed to manage aluminium assets he had acquired between 1991 and 1994, and by 2000, the company gained a majority interest in Sayanogorsk aluminium smelter, the Sayanar foil mill, and other aluminium assets. Through gradual growth projects and well-executed acquisitions, the world's second largest aluminium company would be created, United Company Rusal, after a merger between Sibersky Aluminium and Millhouse Capital in 2000. Now, what is Millhouse Capital? Millhouse Capital is a British registered company that was created to manage assets owned by none other than Roman Abramovich. I will be mentioning this company quite often moving forward, so remember it. The winning streak Abramovich was on during this period was beyond belief. Apart from his newly established aluminium venture, Sibneft was producing $3 billion worth of oil annually. Yes, this was great and all. However, Abramovich had to make drastic changes in his political and business circles if he wanted to maintain this newly found fortune. President Yeltsin's health had been deteriorating since 1998. He had a bit of a drinking problem. Berezovsky would emerge part of a group called The Family, a close-knit unit of advisors around Yeltsin. The group comprised of Yeltsin's daughter, Tatiana Yumashev, her husband, Valentin Yumashev, Alexander Voloshin, Berezovsky's automobile associate, and lastly, Roman Abramovich. It is alleged that no important government appointment could happen without the support of the mentioned people. The principal concern of the family was finding an electable successor to Yeltsin. The successor would end up being Vladimir Putin. Putin's rise from obscurity to the Russian presidency in a short period of time was attributed to his close ties with the family members, Berezovsky and Yumashev. Berezovsky and Putin's ties date back to the early 1990s, when Putin was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. In that position, he assisted Logovars establish a dealership. Friendly relations were there between the two. Berezovsky even took Putin skiing with him in Switzerland on occasions. Disagreements of the two would become public 3 weeks into Putin's presidency. Berezovsky sharply attacked the constitutional reform proposed by Putin. The constitutional reform would give the Kremlin the right to dismiss elected governors. You know what that means for Berezovsky and other people above the law. They could lose their power and control with a blink of an eye. Berezovsky would use his media influence to criticize and attack Putin for various laws and decisions passed by the Kremlin. Putin's vision for Russia opposed that of Berezovsky and other oligarchs, who were used to having a say or a great deal of influence in politics. That's why they made him president in the first place. Putin announced that he would no longer tolerate criticism of the government by media controlled by the oligarchs. In quotes, "If necessary, we will destroy those instruments that allow this blackmail," he declared, responding to a question about Berezovsky, further warning that he had a cudgel in store for him. The state has a cudgel in its hands that you use to hit just once, but on the head. We haven't used this cudgel yet. We've just brandished it. But the day we really get angry, we won't hesitate to use it. Russian prosecutors revived an Aeroflot fraud and embezzlement investigation against Berezovsky, further summoning him for questioning as a witness. Berezovsky was traveling abroad at this point, failing to appear at the prosecutor's office. He would announce that he would not return to Russia and exiled in the UK. Berezovsky stated that, "I'm being forced to choose whether to become a political prisoner or a political immigrant," further claiming Putin made him a suspect in the Aeroflot case simply because ORT had spoken the truth about the sinking of the Kursk submarine. I know the picture's quite blurry, but it's just to give you an idea of what it looked like. This disaster claimed 118 lives in the Barents Sea. The Russian government instituted a systemic takeover of privatized TV networks. Berezovsky, Gaginsky, Badri, and other businessmen lost their media holdings. Berezovsky and Badri sold their stake in ORT television to Roman Abramovich, who would immediately transfer editorial control to the Kremlin. Gaginsky was arrested and not forced, but persuaded, to sell all his media assets that included NTV to the state for $300 million in exchange for his freedom. He fled to France right after. Berezovsky acquired a controlling stake in another TV network, TV6 Russia, where Badri would become chairman and CEO. Thereafter, he would offer employment to locked-out NTV journalists. Russian prosecutors would target Badri too after the stunt, summoning him to the prosecutor's office. He packed his bags and fled the country to Georgia. TV6 would then be liquidated and pulled off air. Abramovich, watching all this transpire, he realized he had to stay in Putin's good graces, and that he did. See, he would be elected governor of a Russian region called Chukotka in 2000, and he did quite the job. Better off, he didn't interfere, nor involve himself in the political opposition. Instead, he got closer to Putin. As a cherry on top, Berezovsky and Badri ended their involvement in Sibneft for $1.3 billion, a fee paid out by Abramovich. Millhouse Capital conducted two transactions during this period. It sold its 26% stake in Aeroflot, Russia's largest airline, for an undisclosed amount. It also sold its 50% stake in United Company Rusal for £1.8 billion to Oleg Deripaska's Basic Element Company. Abramovich became a household name overnight during this period, as his company Chelsea Limited purchased just over 50% of Chelsea Village plc's share capital, which included prior owner, British businessman Ken Bates' 29.5% stake, for £30 million, and over the following weeks, he bought out most of the remaining 12,000 shareholders at 35p per share. The club officially became his at a figure of £140 million. Abramovich took up the club's debt, rumoured to be around £90 million, as well as embarking on large-scale investments, like a state-of-the-art stadium, player acquisitions, and training facility renovations. Over his 19-year ownership of the club, he invested an estimated $1.4 billion, winning 18 major trophies. In November 2003, Sibneft, yes, sorry, this is the Russian logo. Anyway, Sibneft was preparing a merger with Yukos Oil Company to create the largest oil corporation in Russia. But due to a declaration made by Putin to expropriate Yukos and its executives, this deal wouldn't surface, as its executives, of which included Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was the richest man in Russia, worth $15 billion, was imprisoned for alleged fabricated tax evasion, money laundering, and embezzlement charges. I have a dedicated film to him on the channel. I recommend it. It seems Abramovich has quite the passion for football, as the next year, Sibneft would agree to a $58 million 3-year sponsorship with CSKA Moscow. It's said Abramovich was accused of being unpatriotic for the Chelsea purchase, so he did this but had no equity interest due to UEFA rules. Morehouse Capital would cash out on its largest dividend yet, the sale of Abramovich's 75.7% stake in Sibneft to Gazprom, a Russian majority state-owned multinational energy corporation, for $13.1 billion, a colossal profit from his alleged $18 or $100 million investment. He invested a portion of this profit into acquiring a $3 billion, 41.3% stake in Evros a year later. Evros is a UK-incorporated, multinational mining and steel manufacturing company, part-owned by other Russian billionaire businessmen, comprising of Abramovich, Chairman Alexander Abramov, and CEO Alexander Frolov. Abramovich would later become the largest shareholder and subsequent owner. Morehouse Capital also acquired more than 40% of leading Russian and Central Asian mining company, Highland Gold Mining Limited, for an undisclosed amount. With a billionaire lifestyle in full effect, you could only assume a wandering eye and temptations would creep in, as in October 2006, UK-based newspaper, News of the World, would report Abramovich's wife, Irina, had hired 2 top UK divorce lawyers, amidst reports of Roman Abramovich's speculated close relationship with Russian-American art collector and businesswoman Dasha Takeover. Roman and his wife would refute this claim. However, a year later, the two would get divorced, media assuming she would get England's largest divorce settlement of $5.5 billion. Yes, with a B, half of Roman Abramovich's wealth. She instead settled with $300 million. Abramovich proceeded to marry Dasha the next year, and would also step down from his political role of governor of Chukotka. He immediately went on a large-scale shopping spree after this, purchasing a 15-bedroom, £90 million mansion, property number 16, in exclusive Kensington Palace Gardens, concurrently launching his $500 million Eclipse superyacht project. The vessel is the 3rd largest in the world. He's an avid fan of sea vessels. He's owned 5 between 2003 and 2010. It seems jealousy was the recipe of the next year, as a feud with a former business partner was on the horizon. An unimaginable lawsuit would be brought up at the High Court of Justice in London. Yes, Abramovich's former mentor and business partner, Boris Berezovsky, was suing him for $5 billion. Yeah, the man heard of Abramovich's ex-wife's assumed divorce settlement and was like, I'm gonna get a piece of that. Just playing. Berezovsky claimed Abramovich blackmailed him to sell the stake in Sibneft for $1.5 billion, when it was actually worth $7 billion. Berezovsky was seeking $5 billion in damages for the Sibneft saga, as well as $565 million for his alleged involvement in the Russian Aluminium United Company Rusal deal. I will be providing you a summarized version of Abramovich's submitted court papers, which read, prior to the August 1995 decree of Sibneft's creation, the defendant, Mr. Abramovich, informed Mr. Berezovsky that he wished to acquire controlling interest in Sibneft on its creation. In return for the defendant, Mr. Abramovich, agreeing to provide Mr. Berezovsky with funds he acquired in connection with the cash flow of his TV company, ORT. Mr. Berezovsky agreed he would use his personal and political influence to support the project and assist in the passage of the necessary legislative steps leading to the creation of Sibneft. In 2001, Abramovich paid Berezovsky $1.3 billion in an agreement that would be the last payment to Berezovsky and that he and Mr. Badri would cease to associate themselves publicly with Abramovich as well as his business interests. Mr. Badri did provide assistance to the defendant in the defendant's acquisition of assets in the Russian aluminium industry. Abramovich agreed to pay Mr. Badri $585 million by way of final payment. The High Court dismissed the lawsuit. The judge would state that because of the nature of the evidence, the case hinged on whether to believe Berezovsky or Abramovich's evidence. The judge found Berezovsky to be an unimpressive and inherently unreliable witness who regarded truth as a transitory, flexible concept which could be molded to suit his current purposes. This also stemmed from the matter that the initial agreement between the two was oral and not on paper. Abramovich, on the other hand, was seen as truthful and on the whole a reliable witness. Berezovsky would state that he was amazed by the verdict. However, he was allegedly quite affected by this case, as he sold assets to recoup court costs, speculated to be as much as $100 million. Sadly, Berezovsky would later be found dead in his Titans Park mansion in Ascot, a couple of months later, on the 23rd of March, 2013. Cause of death being strangulation. Some believe he hung himself, whilst others rule foul play, as his face was purple instead of pale, like hanging victims usually are, and that an unidentified fingerprint was found near his body, not including one of the paramedics' radiation alarm sounding as they entered the mansion. The reason why Mr. Badri didn't have much of an involvement in the trial is he was dead too. Yes, he had collapsed at his Downside Manor mansion in Leatherhead, Surrey, on the 12th of February 2008, having suffered a heart attack. He had met up with fellow exiles, Berezovsky and Nikolai Gloshkov, at a London law firm earlier that day actually. You probably don't recognize Gloshkov. Remember that Aeroflot case Berezovsky was wanted for? Well, he was part of that case, and was convicted. He served his time in Russia, and later moved to London. Why am I telling you this? Because he's another Kremlin critic who was strangled to death in his southwest London home in 2018. Yes, the Kremlin critic trio that fled to London is dead. Where was Abramovich through all this? Well, he just stayed out of the limelight for several years. Business deals, more investment in his football club, and a divorce from his last wife was done fairly under the radar. He wouldn't make headlines until Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, 2022.
In the capital of Ukraine, the sound of missile strikes and air sirens.
Russian troops are closing in on the capital. Their military vehicles have been filmed entering the city.
They've come from somewhere on the side. They've just made that turn, and that's exactly the road leading to Ukraine. So that's...
President Putin allegedly challenges Ukraine's right to exist, further claiming that Ukraine is governed by neo-Nazis, persecuting the Russian minority, and the role of the war was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Further speculation being putting an end to Ukraine's dream of EU integration and forcing the country back into the Kremlin orbit permanently. Nonetheless, this was just a disastrous event for Russian businessmen and state entity executives, as the European Union and various countries would impose sanctions on oligarchs with links to the Kremlin or Putin. Properties were seized, Western bank accounts would be frozen or blacklisted, and assets would be forfeited. Everything would be taken from those deemed sponsors of the war. The list you're seeing on your screen is just a portion of them all. Over the course of 7 months, Abramovich would be sanctioned by Canada, Australia, Switzerland, New Zealand, Ukraine, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. The UK government is the one we'll primarily be focusing on, as that's where he resided and conducted business. The UK sanctioned him for having stakes in Russian majority-owned companies like Norilsk Nickel and Evraz. Norilsk Nickel smelting and mining company is said to be funding the war, and Evraz is believed to be producing steel for the tanks used in the invasion, which are benefiting Putin's regime, and Abramovich has quote-unquote blood on his hands. The UK government would thus freeze his assets, prohibit transactions with UK individuals and businesses, which included Chelsea Football Club, by the way. They further imposed a travel ban and transport sanctions. Right before he was sanctioned, he put his beloved football club up for sale, later being forced to give it up to the UK government, and the team would operate on a special license. The club would be sold for $5.25 billion to Blueco, a consortium comprising of billionaire sport fanatics and investors, Todd Boehly and Mark Walter. Swiss billionaire medical device manufacturer businessman Hans Wirs was part of them, and part funding from private equity firm Clear Lake Capital. Although Abramovich investing an estimated £2 billion throughout his ownership, he was not to receive any of the proceeds of the sale, as they would be used to assist Ukraine. To rid of the accusations against him, Abramovich attended peace talks at the Belarus-Ukraine border on March 3rd and 4th, 2022, where Abramovich, Ukraine Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov, and one other negotiator suffered initial symptoms of poisoning by an unknown chemical substance. They experienced inflamed and peeling skin, as well as inflammation and piercing pain in their eyes. They all recovered quite quickly, however. Netherlands-based investigative journalism group, Bellingcat, investigated the allegation and stated that the chocolate or water that the three had consumed may have been laced with poison. Samples of the substances were taken, but the poison was unidentifiable, owing to the passage of time. Honestly, I don't know what Abramovich thought would happen. I mean, going against Russia, let alone Putin, to prove a point, should be considered a form of attempted suicide. The poisoning is said to have been a warning to him. As we conclude this film on Roman Abramovich, we're shown that sometimes it doesn't have to take hard work to rake up a fortune. We're taken to the quote, "It's not always what you know, but who you know." This isn't to completely discredit Abramovich. I mean, taking into consideration being an orphan in an uncertain nation, establishing his first business selling toys, to becoming an oil magnate through unfathomable ways. What we need to take a look at is the manner in which he positioned himself to benefit from those opportunities and proceeds. It's undoubtedly impressive. If most people could do this, believe me, they would. Fortunately, most countries don't endorse corruption to the scale, and the average person doesn't possess the characteristics to get away with it. This is Roman Abramovich's story. Thank you for watching.